Welcome.
Yeah, I guess we don't really do this kind of like podcasty setup very often.
Not often enough, really.
No. But with this wonderful view in this lodge that we're in.
How could we resist?
So we kind of wanted to have, well, I wanted to ask you a question specifically because when we started doing photography and videography, we weren't using mirrorless cameras. Nowadays it seems like you've kind of been left behind if you're not using a mirrorless camera, but for the longest time we was using things like this. Now this is Ryan's Nikon D5200.
It's a throwback to an era,
to a time long forgotten.
An elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
But yeah, so we use these at the start of our careers, really. But I wanted to ask you specifically whether you think this is still a viable first option for a creator, because, or any photographer or videographer, because the just the landscape of cameras that we have now, I think these kind of get pushed to the backbone. But they're a steal now; they're like £200-300.
Exactly. I've got the stats in front of me. So you got 24.2 megapixel APS-C crop sensor, which I'm pretty sure that's exactly what my Nikon Z6 has got. Really, I mean,
The
obviously
same one.
I'm sure it's probably updated with, you know, all the gadgets and gizmos, but I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same resolution. It's very easy to get thinking that you're lacking if you don't have the latest and greatest thing with it's got phase detect, autofocus, and all this. I mean, like any question like this, the answer is it depends. It depends on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to capture, whether it's photos, videos, and even, you know, extending further into that, what kind of niche you're looking to pursue.
I agree. I think body shape wise, Canon have kind of, even with the mirrorless cameras, have stuck to that kind of body shape anyway. The old DSLR shape.
It's nice and weighty. It's got a good hand grip to it.
It's extremely light though, as well, because it's made from like a plastic composite, but that in comparison to holding like the S5 that I'm shooting on to my left, like that is so light.
Yes.
So
you can carry this around day after day without because I remember I had this and then I upgraded to the Nikon D750, which is a full frame DSLR, and I remember lugging that up Snowdon was, my word, it was a work of art, I'll tell you that.
That's a big, to be fair though, I could tell dramatically the difference between this cropped CMOS sensor and the footage that came from your full frame D750, because it was like worlds apart in terms of like, oh, I could go, that's Ed's clip.
Yes.
That he sent me straight away without even though the cameras aren't too far. Yes. Aren't too dissimilar.
Although I would say a lot of that's down to the lens more than obviously, you know, there is a difference between a crop sensor and full frame, and if you look close enough, you can tell. But I would say a lot more of that is down to the lens than you would think.
I agree. Yeah, massively. I agree, because because you were shooting on was it a Tamron?
It was a Tamron 24-70, but it was an f2.8 constant aperture through the whole thing. Whereas the kit lens on this, I think it's 3.5 to 5.6. So obviously, as you only get 3.5 at the wider end of the focal range. Whereas as you zoom in, it then starts to narrow it a bit more, and you lose a bit of that shallow depth of field.
Yeah, and these lenses are,
yeah, they have their place.
They are, they exist. Look, I think that's one of the things I would say is a drawback, is that the kit lenses, in my opinion, are some of the worst kit lenses ever. Especially like, because even for the Olympus, the 14-42 EZ pancake lens is like, that's such a useful lens to have, because I know obviously it's double the frame rate in not double the focal length in full frame, but that's a 28-84. So that's like that's your 24-70 almost covered. Yeah. In a pancake lens. But then this thing, it's like, so 1.5 times. So what's that then? 27 to 64 or something.
We'll go with that.
Yeah, I don't know. Maths is way off, but yeah. And the image quality on these lenses is is very average in my opinion.
Yeah, it's on the cheaper end. Like you can see the inside. It's mostly lenses like this have got like a metal lens mount, whereas this is plastic. It's pretty sizable as well, so like you're not going to slip this in a pocket anywhere, and it's also got that little movable thing at the front. I actually broke my lens like this because if you drop it, not that I recommend dropping your lenses, but if you drop this, this wibbles a bit, and it started making a very strange hissing noise as well. So it's not particularly compact. But
It's not.
I think, what price did you say these are at?
I had a look because I'm going to be trading in my D5300, and I think it was something like $250, and that's for like a really fair, very, very, very good condition. So I was like, that's a really cheap camera. The only thing I would say is that there are, Micro Four Thirds options like a Lumix GX8, which is run you about £350, and you're already in on a mirrorless system with lots of really, lots of quality interchangeable lenses.
Yes, and you get your additional video capabilities as well with mirrorless.
I think that's the main thing is the video side of things. Photography wise, even sports photographers now, they're still running the DSLRs because they're tried and true. Pentax are stuck with the DSLR styling because they just don't want to go into that mirrorless. Although they have done some mirrorless cameras before, they kind of like a ride and die for the DSLR.
Yes.
So there's still developments that are going to be made towards the DSLR, but I don't know. I always find it. I think, like everybody says, the best camera you have is the one that's with you.
Yes, 100%.
If you want to see what it's like to kind of shoot with a camera like this, you could watch the Snowdonia videos, and the entire thing, bar the drone footage, of course, was shot on a Nikon D750 and a D5300, and I think I'm always quite proud of those videos because that lens is quite limiting. But I think the videos came out great. So you can do it. You can have a cheap start point. And I was only using the kit lens. I didn't have any other lenses because I'm not sure what some of the lens prices. Cause what lenses did you have? Because you had two bodies in the end, didn't you? You had a D800 and a D750.
I had two D750s.
Oh, two D750s. What was your lens selection from that?
So for those, when I had the D5200, I had the 18-55 kit lens and an 18-300, which sounds like something you really want, but in retrospect, it's very rare that you're in a situation where you need all of that zoom range. Generally speaking, if you need the 300, then you're only going to be shooting kind of 70-200, 70-300, or if you're shooting wide, 18-50, for example. And then when I had the D750, I had the full range actually, a 14-24, 24-70, and a 70-200.
Right. Okay.
So I had a full range of all those things. But again,
what were the prices like on those?
So
I'm sure they've come down a bit now, but I know that there's some lenses for the Nikon DSLRs that have still held their like crazy value.
Yes, generally speaking, obviously you get a cheaper lens if you go for one of the third-party lenses, so like Tamron, Sigma, and so on. I think so. You're 24-70. You're generally looking. It depends if you've got a fixed aperture or wide aperture. You're generally looking around about in the range of about, I'd say, maybe 400-600 for a good second-hand one. About the same, maybe for 70-200. A lot more for a 14-24 because obviously it's an ultra wide.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean the best thing about this is that there's a huge market of second-hand lenses out there, and especially for the Nikon. The F mount has been used in Nikon cameras since like the 60s. So you can pick up all sorts of different like vintage lenses that will just literally slot right on the front.
Easily adaptable with other lens mounts as well.
Exactly. So in terms of photos, you've got 24 megapixels, which is more than enough. like unless you're literally having to shoot a billboard campaign, in which case the people paying you to do it are going to pay to rent.
The minimum requirement, I think, is only 20.
Exactly.
I think some agencies, they want people who shoot with specifically 20 megapixel cameras, which, other than the Micro Four Thirds, like some of them are like 16 megapixels, but again, that doesn't... Megapixels are kind of more to do with how the sensor is divided up.
Exactly.
And less to do with it has to do with image quality, but less to do with like.
Technically, it's usually used
You
as
get
a sales.
fantastic images regardless of megapixel count.
Megapixels are if every single sensor was exactly the same size, made by the same people with the same whatever specs, then yes, megapixels would determine your image quality. But there are a lot more factors that go into deciding that. So in terms of your resolution, this will do you happily for pretty much whatever you want, whether it's landscape, travel stuff. Sports photography, this is probably really good for because you get the additional crop factor. So if you've got a 300mm lens, for example, that's the equivalent of a 500mm on a full frame because it's cropping into the frame a lot more. In terms of video, this is where it really depends. Because obviously in this day and age, everyone loves 4K, everyone loves to talk about it. I shoot in 4K. I don't produce anything in 4K because I like to crop in and to stabilize, for example. But it's very useful to be able to record in 4K to have that flexibility in post. This will only do 1080, a max of 1080 at 60 frames per second. And if you're not particularly, but if you're shooting on a tripod or maybe a gimbal or something, then this will sort you out just fine. I feel like you might be restricted in terms of, so the autofocus on this, for example, is non-existent when it comes to video. I mean, it's there, but if you want the sound of over the top of your video, then, you know, I think the answer to that is obvious. So you're generally going to be manual focusing exclusively with the lenses that come with this.
That's not too bad if you're a filmmaker, though, because I think a lot of people, even for the Lumix, like, I think it's contrast detect autofocus on that one, and the autofocus on it is really, really hard for doing like the product style videos where I want to show them something and it snapped back to me. It takes forever and a day, but when I've been shooting my travel videos using the S5, I've shot them all in manual. So because then I'm in control of, I'll just put the focus peaking on and then I'm in control of what's in focus, what's not in focus. And it's very rare that you kind of, if you're being a filmmaker and you're shooting with intention, it's very rare that you're just going to be letting the autofocus kind of take over. That's, in my opinion anyway, it's more to do with like talking head, product shots, you know what I mean, that kind of thing. So if 100%. You're trying to make something with this in terms of filmmaking, I think you still have that ability. But like you say, just we don't have the 4K there, we just have the 1080-60, and there is something about, and I've noticed it with the Micro Four Thirds sensor as well, where shooting 1080 on full frame, and maybe it's just because Lumix have nailed it, but shooting at 1080 on the full frame sensor looks really, really clean, but then shooting it on a cropped sensor is noticeably shot on a cropped sensor. Yes. Like it has this like look to it.
It's a bit like having a speaker play at like 100 watts when its max is 100 watts versus if its max is 150 watts and playing at 100 watts. Yeah. It's not having to use all of its strength for it.
So you do notice like a slight difference in the image quality, but I've shot for clients with this camera. I've made the money to buy a mirrorless camera using a camera like this. So if you want a start point where you don't want to invest too heavily,
it's an excellent starting point.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can't go wrong.
When you shot on this in Snowdonia, I know you said it seemed as though it was a pretty smooth experience. What were some things you wished it did? Were there any points where you were like, oh, I wish it's very frustrating to try and do this? I would imagine trying to get yourself in focus if you're trying to do a piece to camera like that is you're having to play around with this the whole time.
Yes, because the kit lens, the kit lens for the Lumix S5 is a 20-60, but it's a full frame sensor, so it's a true like 20mm. So doing vlogging with this, and it's at 18mm, but then times 1.5, so it's 27mm. Having to hold your hand all the way out, and I've noticed it. I've got the 14-140 Lumix, and it's great having that range, and I can vlog with it, but I've got to hold my arm out.
I feel you. When I did the Snowden video, that was on full frame, but that's a 28-75, and so about the equivalent, and you're kind of like,
you have to strain a bit. So I wished that the kit lens was a little bit wider. It doesn't need to be like
Massively,
massively wide.
It could be
but,
like
you know,
16 to 55, or even 16 to 45.
if it had been 16, so just 2 mil off, then that would have worked out at 24 mil, and that would have just been a little bit easier to work with. But so you feel like you're cropped in massively in your head the entire time, and it's kind of hard to walk with and do it like that. But in fairness, fully articulating screen as well. I can't remember. Does the D5200 have an articulating screen as well?
Yes, it does. My experience with this as well, because this is predominantly a stills camera, there's a little lever here that you have to flick to get it to go into video mode.
Oh yeah, yes.
It
reminded me.
It's a bit of a pain, firstly. Secondly, it's, again, because it's meant for stills, it absolutely kills your battery life for it to be on video mode. And thirdly, it's just not, when you have a mirrorless camera, or at least the ones that we use, you can just flick the thing straight on and it's in video mode, whereas this is always in photo mode by default. So there's no, if you've spotted something and you want to quickly whip out the camera and shoot it, you got to turn it on, wait for it, and then wait for the mirror to flick up, and then wait to, it's just...
Yeah, you also can't use the screen to shoot stills.
No.
Because if you do that, it goes... And I was like, I keep thinking, gosh, shutter speed, like I've got my shutter speed all the way up, but for some reason when you use the screen to take a photo, it does something like with the mirror, it just doesn't seem to cooperate very well.
I think this was the age before the sensor technology was, it was where it's predominantly using all the mirror stuff, and using the live view was kind of an add-on at the end rather than it being designed to do that.
Because it was like, okay, you can look at it on the screen, but then it's like, just to be fair, I mean, if you're shooting photos, look, use the viewfinder. That's one thing that I'm learning to do a lot more now. But every now and again, you kind of just want a bit of a bigger screen to kind of make sure that everything is in focus. But it kind of doesn't want to do that. But I forgot about flicking the lever to go into video mode.
Yes. Also, this is a first world problem. Well, actually, two things that are first world. These are little luxuries, which it's going to sound very, you know...
No focus peaking.
No focus peak. There's no touch screen. So, which is not, it's not the end of the world. Like we made do without touch screens for a very long time. But when you've become used to being able to just quickly, I've seen something, tap to focus there, and it's not there, it is a bit of a ball ache. Also, no stabilization.
No, and that is like a biggie for me, because I've noticed how smooth, like...
Particularly on your S5.
Yeah, on the S5 or on the Micro Four Thirds cameras that have dual IS. And if you've got a lens that's also stabilized as well, it's like you don't need a gimbal.
Yeah.
So in terms of traveling, like I can just take a much more compact setup. I don't need a gimbal. But if you're taking this, there's a lot of wobble and there's a lot of shakiness to it. And
I should say there are lenses you can get, including the kit lens, that this does have stabilization. Mm-hmm. But because it's from the days of yesteryear, it could be a bit better. But also, that doesn't guarantee, because it's not an in-body stabilization setup. If you take this off and add, say, a vintage lens, it's going to be shaky as hell unless you use a tripod or a gimbal, which is going to add bulk to your setup.
Yeah, I used to rock this with the Joby Gorilla Pod, though. So a lot of the time, you could just kind of wrap that Gorilla Pod around something, and I kind of recommend it for that, because there's no in-body stabilization, just to have a small tripod like the Joby or something, just to kind of help you out with the stabilization end of that. There is built-in flash as well in the top, and there's no anti-aliasing filter in this, which is super interesting, because if you've ever used like a Lumix GX80, 80, I have to remember which one it was, the GX80 has no anti-aliasing filter, but it means that the image quality is kind of has to do with the sharpness, but it just means that the image quality that you get out of the GX80 is really, really good for a 16 megapixel camera, but it has no anti-aliasing filter. But this also doesn't have that as well. So in my opinion, I think that's a little bonus to use. So yeah, think about it.
Yes. Something I do remember about these, this doesn't have its battery inside. Oh no, it does. It's just not charged. These batteries, with the best will in the world, they could be a bit better.
I used to have 4, and I would get through them all in a day of like days worth of travel. Like when we shot the Snowdonia stuff, I remember Leda Valley, I ran out of battery at the end of the day. And I had 4 of them at the time. So they are small. What's the...
This is 8.9 kilowatt hours.
Oh my
About
gosh.
the same as my car.
Yeah, not too much at all. So they are 1,230 milliamp hour batteries. So they're not the biggest things in the world. They probably run this. To be fair, the Olympus batteries aren't too much bigger than that, but they just seem to hold the charge a lot better. Maybe it's to do with how the camera operates itself. But
I think this is back in the days as well when Nikon was kind of, again, live view video stuff was kind of added on as an afterthought, and it was predominantly intended to be a stills camera. So you have to keep that in mind if video is going to be your thing. So again, you have to have, it depends on what your priorities are going to be as to whether this is a good setup. But all in all, if this is your first ever, like we said, we've done professional work for years with this thing. So if you're looking to get into the game without breaking the bank, this could be a very, very good start.
it's it's definitely a viable option for traveling specifically. I think a good person to watch who still uses these cameras today is somebody like Courtney Victoria, who does a lot of shoots in forests, hiking, a lot of macro photography.
Yes.
And she uses 2 of these. I think she has a D800 and a D750. And she carries all that gear with her in one backpack. So you can travel with these. Then it's not... and they're extremely light as well. So, like I said earlier, the weight of the camera is it's so unbelievably light that you can risk taking another lens with you because of the weight. So...
And also, if you happen to kick this down a canyon or something, it's not going to cost you a bomb to replace it.
Unless you break the mirror.
Unless you break the mirror. Well, I was talking in terms of just getting a new one, but...
Oh, right. yeah. You can just buy another one. But that's, So there are many bonuses. Look, these are cheap. They're extremely light. They've got a lot of lenses available for them at reasonable prices. They shoot both video and stills. 1080 at 60. I mean, if you've ever watched, like, Marcus Picks, the amount of times that he shows you, like, he shoots all his talking head stuff at 1080 is just more about how he's done the lighting and the setup. But he uses a lot of old cameras like this.
Yes. If I recall correctly, I think there is a max record time of video on this.
Yeah.
I can't remember I think it's 30 minutes because I remember I was filming a podcast once and we had the podcast set up and I was behind the camera and I had to like signal like the recording's going to stop, and then after the recording had stopped, it'd be another few minutes, and then I'd have to switch battery, and
I have to do that with these though, because these are still it's a European thing, isn't it? I mean, we're scrapping it now. Like the new OM5, for instance, has no record limit, but I think it's to do with for some reason.
I don't really know.
In Europe, there's a licensing thing about there only being to record up to 30 minutes. Yeah, I read about it, but my brain isn't functioning too great.
That can record indefinitely. However, with 4K and the size of SD card that I have, it is essentially limited.
20 minutes. No.
I mean, pretty much. You also have plenty of you've got customizable function keys all over this thing. So it's got plenty of ways to interface with it. The only shame about it is there's only a back dial. There's no front dial, which most of the Nikon bodies do. So it means that basically in live view mode or video mode, if you want to change the aperture, the key to do that is the exposure compensation button, which I don't really use particularly when on video. But if you're one of those people who do, that sounds very pejorative, does it? If you're one of those people, if you like to use your exposure compensation, then you're going to have to make a decision between either having that function or changing the aperture with the dial. That's something to keep in mind.
Has Wi-Fi connectivity as well. Did you ever use that for...
Mine didn't have that. The D5200
Really?
didn't. No, it came out after this. I think as well, this has got GPS geotagging, which I remember my camera did not have. So I had to drain my phone battery. Or I did do it manually for a long time. I remember going to Prague with the D5200 and having to like retrace all my steps and placing each pin where I thought the photo was taken. It was so having geotagging built in is it saves you some time.
Especially, for traveling, if you want to see specifically where you took a shot. if you hit a banger and you was like, where was that spot? And then you got the little geotagging in there, and that's gonna map that out for you. But yeah, definitely a viable first camera for anybody. I would recommend getting one. You can pick them up, I think, on MPB. You can pick these up for like 200 quid.
100%. And also, like, no client is ever asking you what you're using. And if any client is asking you specifics about what camera you're using, you probably don't want to be working with them because they're going to be a pain.
If you ring off the stats, you're shooting photo specifically, then you got a 24 megapixel sensor in there, so that covers you.
Exactly.
Maybe on the video front they might want 4K, but to be honest with you, I think depending on what client you're shooting for will depend on whether they actually even need 4K video.
It's rare that I get asked for 4K. I mean, I'm not forthcoming that I can shoot in 4K, but it's pretty rare. And also you have to remember that even if, like, sometimes I like to have 4K for my own stuff, but that's mostly just keeping it for me.
Yeah.
Most people are watching this stuff on a screen that big anyway. Nobody's going to tell the difference. And certainly with the professional work that I shot with this, nobody has ever said, like, oh, I can tell that was shot on a D5200 rather than a full frame sensor. You know, it's
definitely
like,
not. I'll put some pictures up on the screen, like, of shots that we've done with these cameras, and it's like you can't even, especially when you taught me the fast way. Actually, there's a super quick way of exposing from the sky. It's literally just focusing on the sky and pressing the back button focus. Yeah, the exposure lock on it, and then just bringing it down and taking the photo, and you expose like that. It's like a little hack that saves you so much time. But then when you go and post and you edit the pictures, like I've hit some absolutely wonderful pictures with this.
Yes, you can shoot RAW in this as well.
And RAW and JPEG as well, can't you? You can do both at the same time.
You can do both at the same time. It's also got, I didn't realise it's got a mini HDMI out on it and a mic input, but it doesn't have a headphone output.
And he's campaigning for cameras to lose the HDMI port and start putting in a mic input.
Yes. Or just have USB-C. Just USB-C everything, please. Something I should say for the spectacles wearers amongst us, there is an adjustable diopter here, but it only goes so far. So if you are like me and blind as a bat, you will have to get yourself a little attachment to further your adjustment for your prescription. That's just something to bear in mind if you are one of us.
One last little drawback as well, the internal audio on this is terrible.
Oh,
absolutely terrible.
The microphones are also on the top rather than facing forward. So I remember recording videos of wildlife where I lived, and you can just hear me breathing and swallowing through every clip. So just this beautiful creature, and there's... we're back.
We're back because the cameras have
a record limit, as discussed.
As does this. So I was on about the professional look of the cameras. The when you're shooting for a client, I've noticed that the EM5 Mark III is a more than capable enough camera for. I think it's 20 megapixels with phase detect autofocus, 4K 30 shooting. It's a primed camera to shoot, but taking it and shooting for a client, they're going to have more confidence in one person with this than they would do with me and that camera, and just based on the look of the camera alone, because that DSLR gives off that professional feel. So you're not going to be, it's not like you're investing into something and it's like, oh, but I'll really struggle to get a job with this, or it's like,
yes, exactly.
No, the client will see you as a professional when you're using this style of camera. So that's not, I wouldn't worry about that too much, especially with, there's a creator called Jessica Paice. I think that's how you say her second name. She's a fashion photographer, shoots Canon, and she still shoots DSLR. She's got 2 million subscribers, so don't let that fool you in any way that this technology is outdated. You have to remember, cameras like this was the peak at one point.
Exactly.
So it still is good in what it does, but it's obviously not, you iron out the quirks of each upgrade as you go. But yeah, these cameras are tried and true, and they're ready to go.
You have to remember as well, a lot of the reviews that are out there are essentially, they're adverts, basically. They're trying to sell you new stuff. But as you say, these were once the latest and greatest. Once upon a time, like people shooting on film in the 70s, they only had film and manual focus and maybe one frame every 15 seconds, and yet they still manage to create outstanding images. This, particularly if you pair, a lot of my professional work, I shot this on a 50mm prime 1.8, which cost like £120, brand new at the time. So if you pair that with one of these, you're easily going to be shooting work that is indistinguishable from something shot on something super high end. Nobody's going to tell the difference, and you're not going to have to, you know, clear all the really high hurdles to pay for all this very, very expensive stuff. When you can when this will do the job just fine, and it has all the manual settings you could possibly want to get used to using it, and you know the principles of light and photo. Remember, good photos are made by composition and lighting, not phase detector autofocus, not 50 megapixels, not anything else.
Global shutter or whatever it is they've come out with now, like, yeah.
Exactly.
Agreed, definitely. So if you want to get your hands on a camera like this, I would not fault you. It's a decent enough hybrid camera, but it's definitely a good enough photography camera. And traveling with, you know, it's not they're not the smallest things in the world, but they are extremely light. So, you know, there's opportunity, and I have traveled with this, and it's definitely a viable option. So, yeah, I'm probably going to wrap that video there. I want to thank Ed for coming by and having this discussion with me, because he's shot these for about 10 years, wasn't it, before you moved to mirrorless?
Oh, Lord, it makes me feel very old. But maybe 12 years, actually.
Right, okay.
But yes, I was shooting, like I say, as a hobbyist and then as a professional on literally the model before this for
the older
over 10
model,
years,
yeah.
Without any faults.
So there we go. So if you want to check out Ed's channel, I'll leave a link to that in the description, and also I'll put it up here at the end as well. And yeah, definitely a first travel camera. If that's something you want to get, it's a viable option, 100%. We'll see you next time. Peace out. Thank you.